Shalom. First, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Raha HaKadosh. Double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders of Great Millstone, from whom I learned this truth. And shalom to the 144,000 elect. I am Mayakala. And been listening to a lot of these retired generals and men who have experience going through wars in the so-called Middle East, and giving their opinion of what they expect to happen if the Strait of Hormuz, where we're having where the United States is currently having skirmishes with Iran, and from what these retired colonels and generals are saying is that they are expecting that if things aren't resolved and the straits being opened up by July 4th, they're anticipating a lot of shortages on goods and items before the end of the summer is out. So I went to ChatGPT and asked the question, how long before America starts to experience shortages with the Strait of Hormuz being closed to America. And so I'm just going to read some of these timelines that ChatGPT gives on how long before people start panicking over different items, what kind of time frame is necessary, and what kind of items is the duration of the time frame. But first I wanted to read I'm going to read Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 16. It says, "Better is little with the fear of the Lord Yahweh than great treasure and trouble therewith." And that's exactly what can happen to those people who call themselves being preppers. All right, they're relying on their abilities to store up goods and store up items. And at the time, depending on what the time frame is before the strait is open, if it's going to open, I pray it remains just as it is and even gets worse. But just depending upon the time frame, that people are going to get very desperate, especially when they start to notice, when they go into their grocery stores and notice items not being replenished, not being put back on the shelves. I've already started to notice a few items not being put up on the shelves as quickly. So already it's really having an effect if you're paying attention. So it says, I'm going to go to ChatGPT, and it says, if you mean how long before Americans start noticing shortages after a major supply chain disruption, a tariff shock, war, which is what the case is right now because there's a war going on, embargo, or import slowdown, the answer is usually days to 2 weeks for panic on sensitive goods such as toilet paper, bottled water, fuel in certain regions, medicines with tight inventories. It says grocery shelves can thin quickly if people start hoarding, and people are gonna get very desperate, just depending on how long this thing goes. And it could get to a point where even, who knows, it could be power outages. All right, and if that is the case, Could be shortages on fuel. It could make it very difficult for you, especially if there's no gas power in your home where you can be able to use your stove. All right, it could be a thing where people have all these things hoarded up, all these things, different meats frozen. What are you gonna do if you're not able to preserve those meats? You're gonna have to cook those meats. And as people get desperate and they notice things you cooking outdoors, you never know. Just the aroma itself can bring unwanted guests to your yard. You get to using a generator to keep different items in your house going, like a refrigerator, or having lights on. That could be even a danger to you, having lights on. People noticing you got lights and nobody else. As soon as they notice that could bring people, capture people's attention. All right, and just like I said, just if you're having in a position where you're having to cook meat in order to keep it from going bad, all right, that could bring up that could stir up a lot of tension to you. So, like the scripture just read says, Proverbs 15:16, better is little with the fear of the Lord Yahweh than great treasure and trouble therewith. So just having those items and having those things stored up, all right, could mean a lot of trouble for you. You know, you could find yourself in a position where you haven't protect your family because of being of attention that you've drawn to yourself. Now you got to worry about your weapon, and you got to worry about your ammunition. I'm going to move on a little further down on this list, and it says 1 to 3 months for imported consumer goods like electronics or even auto parts, appliances, tools, clothing, and furniture. Retailers often carry several weeks to a few months of inventory. So if you're needing to have car repairs, you're trying to get car parts, it could be difficult for you to get car parts, get your car, keep your car in good working order. All right, especially if you got parts that have to be imported, brought in from another country. Those items can run low at what they're saying, within 1 to 3 months. Appliances, having to replace appliances, having to use different tools, having access to different tools, and not to mention just clothing and furniture, which people are probably not really going to care too much about furniture at that point, depending on how long it goes. Once desperation set in, nobody's really cared about furniture. And probably not caring too much about clothing either. It says 6 to 18 months. It says housing materials, grid equipment, industrial metals, and pharmaceuticals. These take longer because production capacity cannot ramp quickly. So especially with things like your pharmaceuticals, all right, a lot of those things, different medicines that people take are not going to say they're just petroleum based, but a lot of times different petroleums are used in some of these medicines. These different pills, the plastic coatings that's on them. So things, as this thing goes on, you imagine 6 to 18 months, and some people don't have access to their medicines. All right, don't have a replacement for materials for your houses. Your houses start to deteriorate. So these different things can really take a toll after a while. Let me see here. Says Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. I'm going to read this in the NLT. It says, "Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have." So that's what we're going to be finding ourselves in, that position, having to be content with the things we have. Making things stretch as much as possible, especially when you're talking about different clothing and being able to have different detergents and whatnot to be able to wash clothing. And let alone that, what about the water supply? A lot of these water supply is reliant on power grids. And if the grid is down and there's no electricity, no power, it could be a thing where you don't even have running water. It says, right now the U.S. supply chain is more vulnerable to price spikes and intermittent shortages than to empty shelves everywhere. Companies learn from the COVID and generally hold more diversified supply chains and safety stock than they did in 2020. But many industries also reduced inventories because carrying inventory is expensive. Recent logistics and retail reports show inventories in some sectors are already relatively lean. So it's expensive for these different companies to try to keep a lot of these items in stock. All right, because with things being almost at a point where people are not sure if they need to get those items and kind of start to stock up on them, a lot of times those inventories could sit there, and different companies are concerned about these items just sitting on the shelves as opposed to them knowing people coming in purchasing these items. So they're a little reluctant to have more in stock than they really need to have in stock. It says a few factors determine how fast shortages are felt. One, how dependent the U.S. is on imports. Electronics, rare earths, pharmaceuticals, and some machine parts are heavily import dependent. So you can see in America, we're dependent on a lot of those things to be imported from other countries and being sent to us. It says under existing inventory, it says during tariff threats, companies often front load imports and stockpile goods, delaying shortages for months. I want to go to Google and see what front loading is. Salakia, just a minute here. What does it mean to front load inventories? All right, I asked Google, what does it mean to front load inventory? It says front loading inventory is the practice of importing or stockpiling goods earlier than usual or in larger quantities to preempt expected disruptions or cost increases, such as impending tariffs. It says it allows supply chain managers to secure stock before market conditions become difficult. It says consumer behavior. It says fear causes shortages faster than actual scarcity. Toilet paper in 2020 is the classic example, and I remember that. God, that was the first item that was being taken off the shelves. People were losing their mind, just trying to drive all over the place just to find toilet paper. All right, and I remember that because it was a precious item. I mean, people were calling one another to let people know where toilet paper was. And it's like when you found some toilet paper, you bought as much of it as you could at that point. And people were really stockpiling and really hoarding it. I'm going to go to I'm going to go to 1 Timothy, because what you're really going to have to do is just get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, when you got things such as you're in need of such things such as toilet paper. Yeah, it's nice having the toilet paper, but if you gotta use other items, if you gotta be a little uncomfortable, you take some newspaper and you ball it up, straighten it out, and you ball it up, straighten it out, and you keep doing that till it softens up. Yeah, it's not what you used to, but like I said, you're gonna have to get used to being uncomfortable. Not going to have those items that you just used to having. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 6 says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. So in the NLT it says, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. All right, so learning how to make do, learning to be content with what it is that you have in order to make do. All right, because it's gonna get to a point where these items just ain't gonna be available. They're not gonna be there. All right. I'll read a little bit more of this. It says domestic alternatives. Food and energy are more resilient because the U.S. produces a lot domestically. Specialized industrial components are less resilient. So they're saying that food and energy might not be as scarce as specialized industrial components, for different machinery. 5 says transportation disruptions, port strikes, shipping lane closures, or war can compress timelines dramatically. And like they're saying, if this thing isn't over, if the straits aren't open by July 4th, they're expecting it to be a lot of shortages before summer's out. So that's what, about a month and a few weeks away. And this thing could very easily still be going on. All right, but the way things are going right now, it looks like every time they even attempt to have negotiations, they're not even coming close, despite what you're being told by the media here in America. They're lying to you in an effort to keep the stock market moving. All right. Because every time they're saying they're entering into negotiations and they're getting close, they're lying to you. Because Iran and the media in Iran, they're saying they're not even having negotiations. They're not even speaking. All right, and so if they're not really talking, how are they even getting close to having making a deal? They're not close to making a deal. They're just lying to you. It says the most likely scenario in America during a major disruption is usually prices rise first, and we're already seeing that. I know my grocery bill has changed. I'm pretty much buying the same items, but I'm seeing a big difference in the price. It's going up almost weekly. It says selection shrinks second. That's another thing I'm noticing. Like I said, there's a lot of items that's not even available that I would normally purchase. But being content of getting used to doing without, or switching to something else that I might not normally buy. It says true shortages appear last. says, for example, with tariffs or trade conflict, consumers typically notice higher prices within weeks. And we're already, like I said, we're already noticing the higher prices. All right. And it's like the Israelites, when they were in the wilderness, they had gotten so comfortable, got so used to having different items, to having different things that they got so used to having when they were in Egypt. When it was a little bit more difficult, they had to be, they were more scarce when they were out in the wilderness because things weren't just so readily available. I'm going to go just to Numbers in 15 just to show you. 11 and 15. Numbers 11 and Salakia. Numbers 11 and 5. It says, we remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely. It says the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. It says, but now our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all besides this manna before your eyes. And even though the Lord was providing them with something that they would be able to eat to nourish themselves, that because they had become so comfortable and become so used to having luxury items or items just readily available to them, they were constantly complaining. So you're going to have to learn how to be content. All right. It says back in Chat GPT, it says higher prices within weeks, reduced variety in a few months. Like I said, there's certain things that I'm seeing just aren't being put back on the shelves. It says actual out of stock issues later if the disruption persists. Recent reports already show reduced import volumes and concern about future supply tightness in metals, electronics, and retail goods. So with that, you're going to see there's going to be shortages because this thing is going to get worse. All right. Even if there should be a chance, a time where the items are being put back on the shelf and it seems like they're getting better, it's eventually going to go right back into the same situation because the two sides are far from agreeing with one another. There's a lot of things that Iranians are expect to happen before they're going to allow just anybody to come through the straits, because as they keep saying, the straits are open. It's just that if you are a country that's doing business and allowing America to use your airspace to attack Iran, to you and to America, the straits are not open. But to other countries, the straits are open. So they're not being disrupted the way America and America's so-called allies are being disrupted. All right, and with this thing, it's going to get worse. With it getting worse, it's going to be a lot of people. Like I said, they're going to be looking at the items that you have, and they're going to be wanting what you have, and it's going to come to violent situation. All right, the last precept that I'm going to bring out, and then that'll be the end of this, is I'm going to go to Hebrews chapter 13. In verse 5, it says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. So, as the scripture says, the prophets of the Lord, the men of the Lord are going to eat, all right? And that's what it is it's about relying on the Lord and being content and recognizing and having faith, knowing that the Lord is going to provide for his elect. He's going to provide for the men of the Lord. All right. So the covetousness that you're going to see in people, all right, there's no telling what kind of things that they're going to resort to after wanting what it is that they may see you have. Like I said, they see you outside grilling your food, or they're seeing that you still have lights on, that you got power, you got different items, you're still driving around. It seems like you got your generator power in your whole house. So they listening to the noise that's coming from that generator, knowing exactly where it's coming from. People gonna get have a very covetous spirit on them. All right, and they're gonna be coming for what it is that you have. All right, but I'm gonna go ahead and end this here, and I pray that this has been edifying to the listener. I'm gonna give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rahakadash, Shalom.